You think you know the story. A betrayal. A cross. The most famous judgment in history. But what if I told you that everything you know is just the surface? That the judgment of Jesus was actually a legal scam, full of secrets, illegalities, and conspiracies? What if the accusation of blasphemy were actually a disguise for a much more obscure and scary accusation? What if the man who was released in the place of Jesus were a dangerous terrorist? Get ready to dive behind the scenes of the trial that was not fair. Hello, welcome. In a world where justice is theoretically blind, the judgment of Jesus Christ is one of the most studied and debated cases of all time. And it's no wonder. What many do not know is that, from beginning to end, this process was a complete violation of the laws of the time, both Jewish and Roman. Today, we will unravel the most intriguing facts and the less-known details that have transformed a prophet's judgment into one of the greatest injustices in history. Let's travel from Jerusalem on the Easter night into the walls of a makeshift court, where the law was doubled, the truth was cheered, and the final decision was made not by justice, but by politics and envy. Are you ready to find out the secrets that have condemned the truth? It's night. The air is heavy. The darkness is cut by torches and the sound of weapons. Judas, one of the 12, approaches Jesus and kisses him, the combined signal for the soldiers. At that moment, the betrayal is realized, and the chaos settles down. The disciples who promised to stay with him to the end flee in panic. Jesus is arrested. But here begins the first secret that most ignore. He was not taken straight to the main court. Instead, the soldiers led him to the house of Annas, the father-in-law of the high priest Caiaphas, and one of the most powerful and influential figures of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council. Annas had no right to make a trial, but he wanted an interview. It was a kind of prior interrogation, an attempt to obtain information to use against Jesus. Imagine the scene: Jesus handcuffed before an old and cunning priest who hates him. Annas asks about his disciples and his teachings. Jesus answers calmly, "I spoke openly to the world. Nothing was secret." And then one of the guards, enraged by the answer, slaps Jesus. This slap is a crucial detail. In addition to being a cowardly aggression, it shows the complete lack of respect for the legal process. The Jewish law prohibited aggression to a defendant before the conviction. But for Annas and his own, the condemnation was already a consummate fact. They just needed an excuse to officialize the death sentence. After making sure the case was solid enough, or, more precisely, that the conspiracy was on the spot, Annas sent Jesus to the house of his son-in-law, Caiaphas, where he awaited the true judgment. And the plot would be even darker. Jesus is taken to the house of the high priest Caiaphas, where the Sanhedrin, the 71 religious leaders, is already gathered. But what happened there was a series of cool violations, one after another. First, the trial was held at night, which was illegal. The capital judgments could only be carried out during the day. Second, they encouraged false witnesses to appear, trying to create accusations. Several people came and gave contradictory testimonials, but nothing that could condemn Jesus. Desperate, Caiaphas gets up and asks Jesus, "Are you not going to answer the accusations?" Jesus, in silence, until Caiaphas, using the final blow, asks directly, "Tell us if you are the Christ." the Son of the living God. Jesus finally responds, and his words echo through the room, I am. And in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting to the right of the Almighty and coming over the clouds of heaven. This answer is what Caiaphas needed. He tears his own robes, a sign of outrage, and shouts, blasphemy. The conviction was immediate. But what many do not know is what may have motivated such fury. In addition to blasphemy, there were rumors that Jesus was a wizard who used Egyptian powers. Yes, the accusation was as insane as it seems, but it served as another tool to break what they considered a threat. The Sanhedrin declares him guilty of blasphemy, a crime that, according to the Jewish law, deserved death. But there was a problem. Palestine was under Roman rule, and only the authorities of Rome could execute the death penalty. And that is why the next morning they took Jesus to the next and most dramatic act of this play, the political judgment, before Pontius Pilate. Jewish leaders, who have just condemned Jesus for blasphemy, now change the accusation. They knew that a Roman would not care about a religious crime. The new crime? Sedition. They accused Jesus of proclaiming themselves King of the Jews, a direct threat to the Roman Emperor, Tiberius. Pilate, a cold and practical man, questioned Jesus. Are you the King of the Jews? Jesus responds in an enigmatic way, saying that his kingdom is not of this world. Pilate, an experienced politician, realizes at the time this man is not a political threat. It is harmless. In one of the most intriguing moments of the judgment, Pilate, before the fury of the priests, tries to rid Jesus. He finds no blame on him. Religious leaders delivered him for pure envy. In addition, we have a movie turn around the appearance of Pilate's wife. She sends a message to her husband, saying she had a terrible dream of Jesus, and begs him to have nothing to do with the condemnation. This warning, which few people remember, shows the anguish of Pilate and the weight of the decision that was about to make. Pilate tries to leave. A tradition of Easter allowed the governor to let a prisoner. Pilate thought the choice would be easy. The public would choose the man of peace, the carpenter. He was terribly mistaken. Pilate presents the crowd the choice. Who do you want me to let out? Barabbas or Jesus called Christ? We usually think of Barabbas as a simple thief, but the biblical and historical sources give us a more complete picture. He was not just a criminal. He was a political insurgent, a terrorist of the time, a leader of a revolt against the Roman occupation. His name, Barabbas, means son of the father. A macabre irony, as they were choosing a son of the father rebel in place of the true Son of God. The crowd, incited by the priests, shouts Barabbas. Pilate, frustrated, asks, "So what should I do to Jesus?" The choir answers, "Crucify it." The scene is of overwhelming despair. An innocent man is exchanged for a violent criminal. Pilate, in an act that would become iconic, asks for a bowl of water and washes his hands before all, stating that he was not to blame for that man's blood. To add another layer of humiliation, Jesus is still taken to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee. This is a part of the story told only in the Gospel of Luke. Pilate sends him to Herod, perhaps to get rid of the problem. Herod, who was fascinated by Jesus, treats him with derision, wears him with a king cloak, and returns him to Pilate. a game of cruel and unnecessary power. Luck was released. The condemnation was definitive. Jesus, convicted of a crime he did not commit, is taken to the cross. But as long as all this happened, a parallel and equally tragic story unfolded. In the courtyard of the high priest, where Jesus was being tried, the disciple Peter, the same who promised never to abandon him, is approached by 3 different people who recognize him, and 3 times he denies knowing Jesus. Peter's denial is a secret that was happening next to the trial. Just as Peter denies for the 3rd time, the Bible says that the rooster sings, and Jesus turns to look at him. A look that said everything, the look of pain and betrayal. This is the great truth that Jesus' judgment shows us human weakness and the corruption of power. That judgment was not about the law, but about politics, fear, and envy. The illegalities were so many that from a legal point of view, the entire process could be annulled. He was convicted of a false accusation. He was delivered out of envy. He was humiliated by kings and politicians. And in the end, he was changed by a man who represented the violent struggle that the authorities feared the most. And the most shocking? The story was written by those who condemned him, but what they did not expect is that, in the end, the greatest victory of the truth would be a cross. If you have been shocked by the amount of secrets and details that few people know, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so as not to lose any of our videos. Leave in the comments which of these least known facts surprised you the most. We want to know your opinion. Jesus' judgment was proof that justice, when corrupted, can condemn the truth and free the crime. It is a dark reminder of how power and envy can become a fatal scam. But it is also the story of the greatest injustice that in the end became the biggest victory of all. Until next time, and remember, the truth is always between the lines.